Hey guys, Graham, what is cracking? Bad day, might get a little bit spicy. Don't care. Route sucked, bad mood, people are terrible. Forging ahead. Somebody who's not terrible is our homie bookstore Thor, who sent me the question of the day. I was going to tweet a reply at him, but I was pressed for time and I just told him I'll do a video on this one. So you can read the screen if you like. This was a subject of some discussion over on the Rocketman platform. There was a literary agent who basically said that teen girl readers are no longer capable of reading books from the third person omniscient viewpoint. I've got some thoughts on this. First, let me explain what viewpoint is. Second, let me explain how we got here. So, books are written generally in either first person or third person. Occasionally, you get somebody who thinks that they're an artist and they want to write it in second person, unless it's a choose your own adventure novel. If you are not bilingual, monolingual, unilingual, chances are that you don't really think of verb tenses in the sense of first, second, third person, singular, or plural. But especially if you speak a Romance language, then you kind of are forced to know these things because it is essential to conjugate a verb from the infinitive. First person is anything where the main character is also the narrator of the book. I did this, I went here, I saw that, etc. Third person is where you are standing outside the main character and you are along for the ride. Jane did this, Bob went there, Harry saw that. There is a difference, though, between third person limited and third person omniscient, and it generally has to do with the viewpoint of the narrator. You see, or at least I do, a little bit less third person omniscient nowadays. You do get plenty of third person limited. To give an example of this, if you go back and you read the very first chapter of the very first Harry Potter book, listen to the tone of the narrator in that one, because he's talking about Vernon Dursley going to work, and he's not viewing the world through the limited perspective and senses of Vernon Dursley. It's somebody who knows everything that's going on and does give you a little bit of Vernon's limited perspective, but catches things that Vernon otherwise would not notice. And then you get through the end of the chapter and you've got Dumbledore and McGonagall getting together, and there's some hint of them talking about things that the reader isn't completely keyed in on, but there are cues and ways that it's written that suggest that the narrator does know, and these things will be eventually revealed to the reader. That is a very basic and plain example of third-person omniscient. I'd say the 95% remaining of that series is probably third-person limited from Harry's perspective. Occasionally you get like a dream sequence where it's somebody else. A fantastic example of third-person omniscient then is Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking specifically of the scene where Sam fights against Shelob, and after he wounds her, there's a line that's just perfectly indicative of this tense, where she crawls into the chasm, and whether she dies or whether she's seen again or whatever happens to her, this tale does not tell. And I always thought that line was intriguing, especially because a chapter or two later, Sam hears the orcs bumbling around in the dark, and they wonder if Shelob is still out there. The reader, by way of the narrator, knows that Shelob will not appear again in this book, but the orcs don't know that. For them, it's business as usual to be in this part of Mordor and to be wary of Shelob's presence. You get that information from a third-person omniscient narrator, a narrator that knows everything. So that's how viewpoint works. And why is that relevant to know? Well, third-person omniscient, and these examples that I just gave will kind of demonstrate this, is much more prevalent in either literary fiction in the current day, or especially classics from the past. Jane Austen, I would say, I've read a couple of her books, but only recently. Have I read anything? And that was just Pride and Prejudice, which I read last summer. That was a classic example of a third-person omniscient narrator, but the narrator wasn't walking the reader along and pointing things out that the the characters didn't recognize all the time, but there are things that the narrator knew that that the characters did not. So that, I mean, there's another example of that. You see that with James Fenimore Cooper. You see that very especially with Washington Irving, although he kind of dances across that barrier between third-person omniscient narrator and the narrator almost talking in first person and kind of breaking the fourth wall to address the reader with his own kind of, personal pronouns, personal indicators. So, that can happen from time to time, depending on the tone or the atmosphere that the writer is trying to cast. For our purposes here today, it's relevant to understand that third-person omniscient narrator tends to deal with, or tends to come from older and more classical works. You'll also find it in more heavily prosaic works that tend to resonate more in the current day with male readers of more complex and slow and protracted fantasy novels. The claim made by the literary agent in the tweet today that teen girls are not capable of reading third-person omniscient, I think is the natural result of a long and drawn-out process that was inevitable, and it was kind of like baked in from the beginning. Brief reminder that up until about 12 years ago, well, for a 2-year stretch that ended 12 years ago, I had a literary agent. She was a female agent working in an agency owned and named after another female agent. And while she was representing my work, she was largely sending it off to female editors who were surrounded by female interns and female beta readers in an industry that, thanks to a long march through the institutions, has largely been co-opted or subverted by females, or, I'm not saying this in any kind of derogatory way, females or gay men who are largely going to operate on the same psychological wavelengths, okay? There is, broadly speaking, and I talked about this last year when my wife and I were watching Transformers 1, and Optimus and Megatron started out as friends and then became enemies. And she's like, why do so many stories start out this way, where the arch rivals in the prequel were friends? And I was like, well, it's because it's the opposite of a friends to enemies or enemies to friends romance for women. Women generally prefer peace, and men in fiction generally prefer war. These are profound psychological differences between the sexes. Well, the same thing happens with reading fiction. If you take an established character and you put this character in front of a male reader, he is going to read it, and if he finds the character admirable, he's going to subliminally say to himself, I want to be like this character. Whereas a female reader is going to read this character and say, this character needs to be me. There is a difference there. There's projection versus replacing the character with yourself. This baked-in ingredient was crucial to the success of Twilight. It was very, very necessary for Bella Swan to be plain and bland, and while there were physical descriptors of her in the story, she had to be as replaceable as possible for the female reader to use her as a self-insert to the story. Because these girls were largely not interested in reading about whether Bella got Jacob or Edward. These girls wanted Jacob and Edward to fight over them. It was a master class in romantic lit RPG, we'll say, where the girl got to be, whoever the girl was reading the book, she got to be the main character. This same phenomenon exists now in the Romantasy genre. The female readers who were reading Twilight in their teens 20 years ago are reading this hardcore pornography now, and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, joking about it. For the same reason, these protagonists are largely replaceable, and they project themselves onto them. I think one of the very few examples of that not being the case is with what's her name, Rebecca Yarros, the Fourth Wing series, because there are some very specific attributes that character has that don't make her universally relatable to female readers. But that exception only goes on to prove the rule, because the character basically has the same physical attributes up to and including a genetic disorder that the author has. She wrote a condition that she has. I don't remember the name of it, but it's got something to do with her joints are really soft and flexible, and to the point where they're easily damaged. She wrote that into into the character, because obviously it was something that she understood really well, and it wasn't something that she ever saw in fantasy fiction. So she did that thing where she's like, well, I'll just write a character that has this because, hey, I understand this. Maybe readers aren't able to immediately project onto that, but the author does. It's the same phenom. Female readers like to replace the main character with themselves. Writing a third-person omniscient viewpoint, then, intrudes on that process. It makes it impossible for the girl to say, this is happening to me, when there's this other voice inserting and injecting other information outside of the girl's focus and outside of the girl's head into the narration, into the story. It's distracting. It disrupts the process. I talk a lot about immersion, whether I'm reading a book or watching a movie, how there are things that can happen that can break the immersion for any number of reasons. This is that same effect. Third-person omniscient as a viewpoint wrecks the immersive quality that is crucial, that is built in, that is very necessary to the female reading experience. And this is especially true amongst teen girl readers who are much less likely to put the brakes at all on their emotional involvement in a story. You saw this same thing happen in my day, before Twilight came along. In high school, it was all about boy bands. There are memes circulating now amongst the millennial girl crowd in the Reels and in TikTok and stuff, where women in their late 30s, early 40s are sharing their goofy pictures with their braces and their weird haircuts from the 1990s and saying, haha, this is what I looked like when I went to that NSYNC concert and I thought that Justin Timberlake was going to look out into the crowd and fall in love with me. It's all self-insert stuff that is crucial to the female reading experience. Same with the viewing experience, same with everything else. Men say that they want to be like a character. Girls want to replace the character with themselves. And this is a natural consequence of what has happened in publishing over the last 20 to 30 years. You get the school book fairs that go to schools largely run by female administrators, female teachers. They hype books from publishers that are run by female professionals, female editors, female agents, all that stuff. Back when I had my agent, and I would write a book that was geared toward a male audience, I was specifically given feedback and instructions to say, introduce a female viewpoint, make this appeal more to girls. And it all fell into this kind of feedback loop. It was like, well, why? Well, it's because, boys don't like to read. Yeah, boys don't like to read because they're continually given girl books. Whether it's boy readers or boy writers, the same way that is with boy students in these classmate boxes, or these what the hell am I saying? Classroom boxes that are domineered by the female presence, they're all being punished for not being more like girls. And that's why you get boys that they'll read a little bit in elementary school, but they largely lose interest in it in middle school. And that's because the stuff that is often pushed or introduced to them is boring as hell to them. It's not relatable to them because it's all self-insert stuff. It's saying, hey, put yourself into this story. It's like, I want to read something that's of more interest to me. It's this vicious cycle that has concluded, or at least, come as far as this point here where, now you've got an entire generation of readers that are conditioned to resist a certain type of viewpoint because it doesn't fit with what they have been raised on and what the infrastructure around them will reinforce. What is the solution? Hell if I know. That's got to be a subject for another video. Me being the indie guy, I'm going to play the only song I know right now and say, read indie stuff, go to Upstream Reviews, we recommend cool things, blah, 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 blah. This is the kind of problem that is only going to intensify and be amplified as long as we continue to ignore basic truths about the psychology of the sexes. Things that men are basically generally interested in. Things that women are basically generally interested in. How men interact with IPs. How women interact with IPs. How men and women read and watch things. How boys and girls play with toys differently. I don't want to hear any, well, I know this is an exception. Like, exceptions exist, yes. Exceptions do not disprove the rule. They reinforce it. This is a fact of the matter, is that boys want to become more like the things that they enjoy, and girls want to replace the things that they enjoy with themselves. This is not a damning statement about either of the sexes. It is just a factual and inescapable and inalterable. Is that a word? I don't care. It is now. I do not give a shot. No. Be a good boy, Graham. Don't say the word. I don't care. It is the word now. This is a hard and immutable fact, as real as gravity. You cannot change it. And ignoring it and insisting that it change is how we got here. How do we right the ship? I don't know. Somebody write a third-person omniscient romance where the girl is not able to shut out the voice of her father in the background telling her you've disappointed him by being a whore. Oh, Graham's going to go to war with Romantasy. I don't care. You're all sluts. Repent. Anyway, drive safe. See you out there.